Hi everyone. One of the silliest claims I see made by trans-identifying people and their allies is that trans people are not an ideology. Well, nobody is saying that they are. Don't you know what the word ideology means? There are countless definitions online. Common to all of them is that an ideology is a set of ideas, of principles, not of people. They're principles that are intended to be adopted and adhered to by wider society and thereby to shape material life. But trans activists hate us referring to gender ideology or any of the other things we call it. Trans ideology, gender identity ideology, genderism, etc. One of the daftest comments on this topic was left on my YouTube channel earlier this year. It was part of a much longer comment in a longer exchange. About the trans ideology, it is bogus. Just like the so-called woke agenda, it does not exist. It is part of right-wing fantasy propaganda. I am what you'd call a leftist, and I am sure I never heard of anything like that in my bubble. Well, that's because your bubble is full of brainwashed screwballs going la 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 la. Google it and you end up at 4chan, Fox News, Crowder, does he mean Stephen Crowder? Ben Shapiro, or even worse, PragerU, nowhere else. This is complete nonsense, of course. You only have to search here on YouTube to find videos discussing it from intelligent, educated people on our side and some people on their side too. However much the gender nutters might hate people who talk intelligently about gender ideology, they are not right-wing fantasists from 4chan or any of those other things this guy says. I mean, take Dr. Debbie Hayton, a left-wing trans-identifying man whom just about everyone loves to hate these days. He has a regular column in The Spectator and he frequently mentions it. The egregious impact of gender identity ideology. Europe deserves far better than gender ID ideology. I am deeply concerned about the impact of gender ID ideology on children, and on he goes. An avowedly left-wing trans rights activist, not a right-wing propagandist. Another place where you'll see the dreaded term is, of course, my own website at peaktrans.org. One of the first pages I created is entitled Transgender Ideology, and it contains links to dozens of articles in a variety of publications that also use the term, and not just in the headlines. In fact, since I saw that guy's comment, I've become more aware of just how widely the term is used by academics and by journalists writing for serious, long-established mainstream publications. I also link to a free book by Dr. Joanna Williams called The Corrosive Impact of Transgender Ideology. She was an academic at the University of Kent. I think she now runs a think tank, but she begins this book saying, in less than 2 decades, transgender has gone from a term representing individuals and little used outside of specialist communities to signifying a powerful political ideology driving significant social change. At the level of the individual, this shift has occurred through the separation of gender from sex before bringing biology back in via a brain-based sense of gender identity. This return to biology allows for the formation of a distinct identity group, one that can stake claim to being persecuted and depends upon continual validation and confirmation from an external audience. All critical discussion is a threat to this public validation, and it is often effectively curtailed. I think that sums it up so nicely, I'm not sure I need to say any more, but just in case that was too difficult for any viewers, the explanation I give directly on my page is that, quote, There is a set of highly contestable ideas arising from a core tenet that gender identity takes priority over the sex we are born as in determining whether we are men or women. That is gender ideology. You cannot deny this. When the standard response to asking someone to define a woman is for them to come back with anyone who identifies as one, that is a demonstration of the core tenet, as well as of the stupidity of the commenter, because of course it's circular and tells us nothing about what a woman is. Other responses to that question include stuff like this.
It's someone who lives up to a social construct that heavily correlates with phenotype, aesthetics, and behaviours.
So a woman has nothing to do with being one of the two sexes, the one that evolved to bear the infants of our species. It's someone who heavily correlates to phenotype. What the hell does that mean? According to Nature magazine, the term phenotype refers to the observable physical properties of an organism. These include the organism's appearance, development, and behaviour. I would say that definition excludes most, if not all, trans-identifying men, very few of whom pass as women on the basis of their appearance, and even fewer on the basis of their behaviour, in my opinion. But these things are very subjective, and the same goes for aesthetics. What does he mean by that? A woman, or a man, he uses the same definition for both, is someone who lives up to a social construct. What are we living up to exactly? A figment of his imagination by the sound of it.
A woman is somebody whose internal perception aligns with what we culturally view as being feminine.
So that excludes every woman who spurns what we culturally view as feminine, which is a large proportion of radical feminists. Also, presumably, men who are not comfortable with what we think of as masculine, the ones called effeminate, who in years gone by were regularly beaten up and still are in some places. When they spout silly, airy-fairy nonsense like this, they're always careful to avoid specifying exactly what they mean. We don't get examples of the behaviours the first guy, Stephen Woodford, has in mind, or examples of what Hunter Avallone, the second guy, means by culturally viewed as feminine. They avoid giving examples because they know they are talking about stereotypes which, regardless of any grain of accuracy in them, are invariably oversimplifications and very easy to undermine. Clearly, neither of these answers that we've just seen are any better than saying a woman is somebody who identifies as one. They desperately want to keep womanhood in the realm of the subjective, a matter of feelings, not a matter of objective reality. And for the sake of consistency, they treat manhood the same, but women who LARP as men generally don't impact on real men as much as the other way round. That's what gender ideology is. It starts with the notion that sex isn't what you're born with, it is assigned. That expression, assigned at birth, is intended to prime us into acceptance that people can decide they want to be the other sex or neither sex, or that they can switch between the two depending on their mood, that they can do all this and it's perfectly normal. Gender identity determines sex, though they call it gender and pretend to mean something different by that, but they don't, because if they did, they wouldn't be demanding the sex-based rights and protections and privileges of the other sex. I think the best descriptor is gender identity ideology because of its reference to that core tenet. It does what it says on the tin and makes a distinction from the traditional gender ideology in which it is rooted, meaning the system whereby the sex you are determines how you are supposed to be, how you should present yourself, how you should think and behave, masculine or feminine. I mean, do those people who deny transgender ideology accept this original meaning of gender, and that feminists and gay and lesbian rights activists challenged it and fought against it? All that stuff about how what you have to do in life is get a heterosexual marriage, multiply, women be full-time housewives, men be breadwinners, girls play with dolls and tea sets, boys play with toy cars and toy guns. We challenged stereotypes. Gender identity ideology reinforces them, especially the non-binary nonsense pushers who claim a special label because they're supposedly neither feminine nor masculine enough to call themselves either a man or a woman. We said child rearing and homemaking should be a shared responsibility, but if a man wants to do it full-time and his wife be the main breadwinner, that's okay. If boys want to have Dolly's tea parties, that's okay. Same-sex couples are okay. What we did not say is that a boy's preference for playing with dolls could be a sign that he is transgender, i.e. a girl. The very notion that a boy, a male child, could be anything other than a boy, regardless of what he says, what he wants to wear, and what or who he prefers to play with, is purely ideological and dangerous. The reason they hate us referring to ideology is clear from many comments on social media. They think it undermines their status, their claimed status as an oppressed minority fighting for their rights. They want transgender to be accepted and seen as the equivalent to other minority statuses, particularly to being gay. The movement for gay rights is the one they have piggybacked onto with the help of many gay people and their organisations, and opposed by many other gay people. I've just started reading the new book by Gareth Roberts called Gay Shame, The Rise of Gender Ideology and the New Homophobia. In the introduction, he writes about how he's seen a huge change from the deeply homophobic culture of his youth to widespread acceptance and equal rights, and now homophobia is on the rise again. The phrase same-sex attraction being regularly referred to as a transphobic dog whistle, homosexuality being redefined as same-gender attracted, the LGB Alliance being dubbed as a far-right hate group for daring not to include trans in its remit. Dragged to court and 2 years of costly and utterly pointless legal wrangling, the broadcasting media actively suppressing the voices of dissenting lesbians and gay men who dare to speak out against the trans activists. Lesbians ejected from Pride and gay men assaulted at such occasions for protesting that they are same-sex attracted. There's a great interview with Gareth Roberts on the Queen's Speech, which is Clive Simpson's YouTube channel. I'll link below. And I'll also link to his mate and my mate, Dennis Kavanagh's very eloquent thread on Twitter X, in which he said, "The greatest enemy gay rights ever really had was the gay rights movement itself." And further in the same thread, he called it the snake that ate its own tail, thanks to its embrace of transgenderism. Dennis is director of the Gay Men's Network, by the way. And I have yet to see a coherent argument from any gay man or lesbian in favour of transgender ideology, or as to why there should be no LGB without the T, as they just love to chant. And I recommend King Critical's recent video on why trans activism isn't a civil rights movement. Nothing like one. Love that thumbnail, by the way. Amongst the many good points he makes when comparing the trans movement to real civil rights movements, including the ones for gay rights, obviously, is that the victims of oppression really didn't and don't ask much, if anything, of other people, whereas trans activists are demanding a great deal of everybody, including changing the very meaning of the words man and woman, obviously accessing our spaces, and demanding we shut the hell up if we disagree with any part of it. Also, how legislative changes in favour of transgenderism in this country, the Gender Recognition Act of 2004, then the Equality Act of 2010, which enshrines gender reassignment as a protected characteristic, those laws predated widespread transactivist campaigning by years. All the heroic transactivist protesters trying to shut down, bully and intimidate women when we started holding public meetings regularly, which was when from about 2017 onwards, all that happened well after all the major institutions had already started imposing gender ideology from the top down. This is the total opposite of any real civil rights movement. Okay, here are a few more examples from people in denial. I won't read them all out, but this one says, the people who created transgender ideology are the transphobes. Trans people are not an ideology, as we are a material reality and physically exist. The second sentence here doesn't bring anything to the table because obviously we know that people who call themselves trans exist. Where there is disagreement is over what exactly that means. What's the definition of a trans person? The answer to that question depends on who you ask. They don't even agree amongst themselves, and the answer has also changed over the years. Some of them claim there is a trans umbrella and they are reaching out to all manner of people and trying to pull them under it. I'm not sure you can say that about anything else. I mean, homosexual has always and only ever meant same-sex attracted. Denying this and saying, oh no, it means same-gender attracted and your gender is what you identify as, so a straight man can be a lesbian. That is part of gender ideology. It's not gay ideology, is it? As for the first part, no, of course it doesn't make sense that people who are intolerant of trans-identifying people would create an ideology that allows them to claim transgender status. What he presumably means here is the same as the other denialists, that the notion of there even being an ideology is a fabrication, which is ridiculous. I've just given an example of it, and they're trying to replace same-sex attraction with same-gender attraction, and they call people who disagree with that genital fetishists, a notion which is every bit as ridiculous. As I once heard the feminist philosopher Jane Clare Jones say,
I mean, the whole genital fetish thing is so bizarre. Fetishism is taking your libido and putting it into a non-sexual thing. Directing your libido at other people's genitals is by definition not fetishism.
That was at the first LGB Alliance conference in 2021. And the gender ideologues are getting increasingly absurd. On Matt Walsh's film, we were treated to the spectacle of Dr. Marcy Bowers, then President-elect of WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, saying this.
I identify as a woman, but...
You're a woman, right?
I'm a woman with, I mean, that's my life, day to day, but I have a transgender history.
So here we see Dr. Bowers attempting a further development of the ideology. Once upon a time, the Marcy Bowers of this world were just transsexuals, then it was trans women, and now it's just women, but with a transgender history. Some people who were born male are now claiming to be female, even born female. See this exchange here between Scottish feminist and the Canadian anti-woman politician Morgane Auger. She says, the real woman says, I am a female, I was born a female, I don't identify as a female, I just am a female. Females are abused, murdered, discriminated against, trafficked, sold and raped. They don't identify into that. It happens to them because they were born female. And it is the recognition of that truth that is fundamental to feminism and to feminist opposition to gender ideology. Morgane Auger responds by repeating her words exactly, but leaving off the second part, the last sentence. I am a female, I was born female, etc. And he's saying this about himself. So he's not even claiming to have changed sex, never mind gender. He's just claiming to have been born female when he wasn't. O'Shea is a heterosexual man who has fathered 2 children. For him to claim to be female makes no sense, and it's tempting to think that he was just trolling, but he's not the only one, very far from it. Another example here is India Willoughby.
I am a real woman, okay?
Who is also a heterosexual man and a father, claiming to be 100% biological woman and female. He says the fact that the gender critical movement can't handle this simple fact isn't his problem. Jealous. In a subsequent post, he proudly shows his NHS tag, which says female, and which possibly means he's in a female hospital ward, which means there will be other actual women in their beds in the same room. Why should they have to endure having a man in what should be a single-sex space? The complete lack of concern for women's feelings is absolutely typical of so many trans-identifying men. That is a consequence of the widespread acceptance of the ideology. Enough. I've talked many times about the impact of gender identity ideology. I've made 2 videos dedicated to the effect on women's sports. And the last video I did was about these men in women's spaces. But the most dangerous consequence of this pernicious belief system is the effect on children, the utter nonsense that there is such a thing as a trans child, and that this notion is being reinforced in schools. I was watching this video in which Helen Joyce talks to John Anderson about transgenderism, and she recounts how people who live near her had discovered their daughter had been calling herself a boy at school for 18 months, and the school, the teachers, were going along with it. The students had been told to go along with it all and call the girl by a boy's name she'd chosen, but to keep it secret from her parents. The girl went back to being a girl at home, and her parents found out purely by chance what had been going on for a year and a half. When they challenged the school said it was safeguarding. They had to go along with it, otherwise she would kill herself. This appalling situation is absolutely a consequence of gender ideology. And as Helen points out, it isn't child safeguarding. A child is most likely to try to kill herself at home. Safeguarding would be warning the parents and getting the child help.
That's what the teachers should have said if they seriously thought this child was suicidal. Oh gosh, we need to tell your parents, we need to tell your GP, you need an urgent psych evaluation, you need help from a professional. Not, all right then, you're really a boy.
Thankfully here in the UK at least, it seems the tide is finally turning. The Cass Review, published a few weeks ago, has exposed the biggest medical negligence scandal of our time, with thousands of unhappy adolescents being prescribed unevidenced, life-altering treatments. The vast majority of these kids were gay or bisexual. Our publicly funded National Health Service has been transing the gay away, in effect supporting homomisic conversion therapy. Distressed young people who should probably have been referred to adolescent mental health services had instead been fast-tracked into becoming lifelong guinea pigs in a medical experiment. And it was no surprise that the minute the Cass Review was published, trans ideologues were lying about its contents and about her. The comments are just unbelievable. I think my favourite one suggested that the hugely accomplished paediatrician, who is Dr. Hilary Cass, wasn't qualified to carry out the review because it is supposed she has no experience of caring for trans kids. And it called the review a hack job. Inevitably, other people said she'd obviously been paid to say what she said. These people are nuts. And I've no doubt they will be trying to ruin her reputation and probably her life, as they have tried with so many others. Remember, you are not permitted to say anything they don't like. You can't even just disagree with the ideas, let alone undertake a serious investigation like Dr. Cass. you will be called a transphobe, by which they mean intolerant of people who claim a transgender identity, in other words, a bigot. It is evident from their behaviour, from their refusal to debate, from their attempts to silence and no platform people, to get people fired from their jobs and try to ruin their livelihoods, and from their exhortations to be violent, from their actual violence and their celebration of violence against those of us who dare to oppose them, that it's not just an ideology, but a very authoritarian one, no better than fascism. That's all. Thanks for watching.